They were mocked for inheriting a ruin, an abandoned home long forgotten. But beneath its dust, they found something powerful enough to change everything. They mocked her for it. A maid with nothing but debts and calloused hands inheriting a rotting house on the edge of nowhere. Take the cash and walk away, they laughed. But when Sarah Jenkins and her daughter stepped through that warped wooden door, they didn't find dust and decay. They found something else. A forgotten name. A warning written in trembling ink. And a secret buried beneath the earth. One powerful enough to change everything they thought they knew about her family and the world. What started as an inheritance born of pity ended as a revelation buried in blood and light. This is the story of how one woman cleaned away the lies of the past and uncovered a legacy the world tried to erase. And before I forget, where are you watching from today? We love seeing how far these stories reach. Enjoy the story. A life of forgotten promises is a debt that will always be paid. Sarah, a woman who had spent her life cleaning up after others, inherited a house she never knew existed. But this was no gift from a loving relative. It was a final, cryptic message from a man who had vanished from their lives, leaving behind a legacy of shame and a house full of secrets. Sarah Jenkins scrubbed at a stubborn stain on the marble floor, her reflection a tired-looking woman of 38. Her hands were rough, her knees ached, and her uniform, a crisp but cheap polo shirt and khaki pants, felt like a second skin she could never shed. For 15 years, she had been a maid, a ghost in the grand houses of the wealthy, leaving behind nothing but the scent of lemon polish and the echo of her quiet footsteps. Her daughter, 10-year-old Lily, sat at a polished mahogany dining table, her small legs dangling high above the floor. Lily was a splash of color in the monochrome world of her mother's work, her blonde hair a halo under the chandelier's glow. She was doing her homework, her brow furrowed in concentration, a sight that both warmed and broke Sarah's heart. Lily deserved more than a life spent waiting for her mother in the corners of other people's homes. "Almost done, sweetie," Sarah whispered, her voice barely a rustle in the cavernous room. Lily looked up and gave her a small, brave smile. "It's okay, Mom. I'm almost done too." That smile was Sarah's fuel. It got her through the long days, the condescending glances, and the gnawing feeling that she was failing her daughter. They were a team, a tiny island in a vast, indifferent ocean. But the tide was rising. Their small apartment, a cramped two-bedroom in a rundown building, was about to be sold. The new owners were raising the rent, and Sarah, with her meager savings, knew they would soon be homeless. The phone call came that evening, a jarring ring that cut through their quiet dinner of canned soup and toast. It was a lawyer, a man with a voice as dry as old paper, informing Sarah that her great-uncle, a man she hadn't seen since she was a little girl, had passed away. His name was Arthur, and he had left her something in his will. "He left me something?" Sarah repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. "I don't understand." "He disappeared years ago." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Yes, well, it seems he's been living a rather reclusive life. He's left you his property. A house and a small parcel of land just outside of town." A house. The word hung in the air, a shimmering mirage. A house of their own, a place where no one could raise the rent, a place where Lily could have her own room, a yard, maybe even a dog. For a fleeting moment, hope, a long-forgotten guest, knocked on the door of Sarah's heart. But then came the mockery. The news of their inheritance spread through the small town like a weed. A maid inheriting the old Miller place, people whispered at the grocery store. That's a laugh. The Miller place, as it was known, was a local legend, a dilapidated house on the edge of town that had been abandoned for decades. It was a place children dared each other to approach on Halloween, a place whispered to be haunted, cursed, or both. The owner of the house where Sarah cleaned, a woman named Mrs. Gable with a voice as sharp as her diamond rings, cornered her in the hallway. "I heard about your windfall," she said, her lips curling into a smirk. "The old Miller place. How quaint. I suppose it's better than nothing for people like you." People like you. The word stung, a familiar poison. Sarah just nodded, her face a mask of polite indifference, while inside, shame and anger churned. The day they went to see the house was gray and overcast, the sky the color of a bruise. The taxi driver, a man with a mouthful of gossip, dropped them off at the end of a long, overgrown driveway. "This is it," he said, eyeing the two of them with a mixture of pity and amusement. Good luck. The house was worse than the rumors. It was a skeleton of a home, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin, its windows like vacant eyes. The porch sagged, the roof was a patchwork of missing shingles, and the yard was a jungle of weeds and thorns. Lily, who had been bubbling with excitement, fell silent. She clutched her mother's hand, her small fingers trembling. "Mommy," she whispered, "it's scary." Sarah's heart sank. This wasn't a dream come true, it was a nightmare. The house was a reflection of her own life, broken, neglected, and full of forgotten promises. But as she stood there, the wind whipping her hair across her face, a strange feeling washed over her. It wasn't just despair, it was defiance. This was theirs. This broken, forgotten place was theirs, and no one could take it from them. "It needs some work," Sarah said, her voice stronger than she expected. "But it's our home, Lily. Our home." They pushed open the front door, the hinges groaning in protest. The air inside was thick with the smell of dust and decay. But as her eyes adjusted to the gloom, Sarah saw something that made her catch her breath. In the center of the living room, covered in a thick layer of dust, was a large, wooden chest. And on top of the chest, a single, folded letter. It was addressed to her. For Sarah. With trembling hands, she opened it. The handwriting was shaky, the ink faded, but the words were clear. "My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have found your way home. I know I have not been a part of your life, and for that, I am truly sorry. I had to disappear to protect you, to protect what I was working on. This house, this land, it's all for you. But it's more than just a house. It's a key to a new future, a better future. Don't believe what they say about me. Don't believe the stories. The truth is in these walls. The truth is in the earth. Find it, and be brave. Your great uncle, Arthur Miller." A key? A new future? The letter made no sense. But as Sarah looked around the dilapidated room, at the dust motes dancing in the slivers of light, she knew one thing for certain. Her great-uncle hadn't just left them a house. He had left them a mystery. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a flicker of something more than just survival. She felt a sense of purpose. The first few weeks were a blur of backbreaking work. Sarah quit her second job, the one in the evenings, and poured every spare moment, every ounce of her energy, into the house. She and Lily started with the yard, a wild, tangled mess that seemed to fight back with every weed they pulled. They filled dozens of trash bags with thorns and overgrown brush, revealing long-forgotten flower beds and a winding stone path. One afternoon, as they were clearing a thick patch of ivy from the side of the house, Lily let out a small cry of surprise. "Mom, look!" Beneath the ivy, half buried in the dirt, was a small, metal door. It was low to the ground, no bigger than a cellar window, and it was locked. There was no keyhole, no handle, just a small, round indentation in the center. "What is it?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. "I don't know," Sarah said, her heart starting to beat a little faster. She remembered Arthur's letter. "The truth is in these walls. The truth is in the earth." They tried to pry the door open, but it wouldn't budge. It was sealed tight, as if it hadn't been opened in a very long time. That night, as Lily slept soundly in her small cot in the one room they had managed to make habitable, Sarah sat by the fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. She thought about her great-uncle, a man she barely remembered, a man the town had branded as a madman, a recluse, a failure. She remembered whispered conversations from her childhood, fragments of stories about a brilliant but strange man who had been a war hero, a self-taught engineer who had come home from the war with a head full of radical ideas. He had been working on something, they said, something that would change the world. An engine that could run on water. The townspeople had laughed at him, called him a fool. And then, one day, he was gone. He had vanished without a trace, leaving behind his house, his workshop, and the whispers that followed him like a ghost. Was that what was behind the small metal door? The truth about her great-uncle? The truth about his impossible invention? The next day, armed with a new sense of determination, Sarah went to the town's small library. The librarian, a kindly woman named Mrs. Peterson, remembered Arthur Miller. He was a brilliant man, she said, her voice soft with memory. Ahead of his time. He used to come in here for hours, reading books on physics, engineering, chemistry. He was always scribbling in his notebooks, his mind a whirlwind of ideas. She led Sarah to a dusty corner of the library, to a shelf of local history books. There, in a book about the town's veterans, was a picture of a young Arthur Miller in his army uniform. He had a kind smile and eyes that seemed to hold a universe of secrets. The book said he had been a decorated hero in the war, a genius at fixing things, at making the impossible possible. It mentioned his work on a new kind of engine, but it dismissed it as a failed experiment, a pipe dream. But Sarah didn't believe it. She couldn't. She had to know the truth. That evening, as she was cleaning out the old, dusty fireplace, her fingers brushed against a loose brick. Her heart skipped a beat. She pushed on it gently, and it moved. Behind the brick was a small, hidden compartment, and inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a strange, metal object. It was a small, flat disc about the size of her palm, with a series of intricate gears and symbols etched into its surface. And in the center, a small, round protrusion, the exact size and shape of the indentation on the metal door. It was a key. With Lily by her side, her small hand clutching a flashlight, Sarah went back to the metal door. Her hands trembled as she inserted the key. There was a soft click, and then a series of whirring sounds as the gears inside the lock turned. The door swung open, revealing a dark, narrow passageway. The air that wafted out was cool and smelled of damp earth and something else, something metallic, like ozone. "Should we go in?" Lily whispered, her voice a mixture of fear and excitement. Sarah took a deep breath. She didn't know what they would find in the darkness, but she knew they had to find it. This was more than just a house. It was a legacy. It was a chance to reclaim a story that had been lost, to give a voice to a man who had been silenced. "Yes," she said, her voice echoing in the sudden stillness. "We're going in." They descended the narrow, stone steps, the flashlight beam cutting a path through the darkness. The passageway opened into a large, underground room, a hidden workshop that was a world away from the dilapidated house above. The room was filled with strange and wonderful machines, their metal surfaces gleaming in the flashlight's glow. There were blueprints and diagrams pinned to the walls, covered in complex equations and intricate drawings. And in the center of the room, on a large, metal platform, was the most astonishing thing of all. It was an engine, but it was unlike any engine Sarah had ever seen. It was a beautiful, complex creation of copper coils, crystal chambers, and gleaming pipes. And connected to the engine, a large tank of water. This was it, Arthur Miller's engine, the engine that could run on water. But as they drew closer, they saw something else, something that made Sarah's blood run cold. On the floor, next to the engine, was a dark stain, a stain that looked like dried blood. And then Lily screamed. She was pointing the flashlight at the far corner of the room, at a small, wooden desk. Slumped over the desk, as if he had fallen asleep in the middle of his work, was a man who had been there for a very, very long time. It was Arthur Miller. He was not a ghost. He was not a madman who had run away. He was a man who had died in his secret workshop, guarding his invention, his legacy, his truth. Sarah rushed to his side, her heart pounding in her chest. There was a letter in his hand, clutched so tightly that she had to gently pry it from his fingers. It was addressed to her. "My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, then you have found me, and you have found my life's work. I am sorry that I could not be there to guide you, to tell you my story myself. But I was not safe. They were coming for me, for my invention. They wanted to steal it, to bury it, to keep the world chained to their oil, their greed. I had to hide it. I had to hide myself. But I knew that one day, you would come. You have my blood in your veins, my spirit in your heart. You are the only one I can trust. The engine works, Sarah. It works. It can change the world. It can free us. But it is also dangerous. In the wrong hands, it could be a weapon. You must be careful. You must be clever. You must be brave. The plans are hidden. The key is in the stars. Look to the north. Follow the river of light. This is my legacy. Now it is yours. Your loving great-uncle, Arthur." Sarah looked up from the letter, her eyes filled with tears. She looked at the engine, at the man who had given his life to create it, and she knew what she had to do. This was not just about a house anymore. This was about justice. This was about a promise. This was about changing the world. The silence in the workshop was heavy, broken only by the sound of their own ragged breaths. Lily, who had been so brave until now, buried her face in her mother's side, her small body trembling. Sarah held her tight, stroking her blonde hair, trying to shield her from the grim reality of what they had found. Before them lay not just a secret, but a life cut short. Arthur Miller had died here, alone, in the cold, damp earth, surrounded by his magnificent, impossible creation. He had died protecting a dream he had now passed on to them. Sarah's grief was a strange, hollow ache for a man she had never truly known, but whose legacy was now irrevocably intertwined with her own. She felt a profound sense of injustice. The world outside had dismissed him as a failure, a madman. But the truth, hidden beneath a forgotten house, was that he had been a visionary. Tears streamed down Sarah's face, silent tears for the lost years, for the lonely death of a brilliant mind. She gently closed Arthur's eyes, whispering a prayer she didn't know she remembered. "Rest now," she murmured. "We'll take it from here." The immediate problem was overwhelming. What were they to do? They couldn't just leave him here. But calling the police, the authorities, would mean exposing the workshop, the engine, everything. Arthur's warning echoed in her mind. They were coming for me, for my invention. They wanted to steal it, to bury it. She couldn't let that happen. She had to protect his secret, just as he had. A plan, desperate and fragile, began to form in her mind. They would have to move him. They would have to give him a proper burial, but in a way that kept his final resting place, and his life's work, a secret. "Lily," Sarah said, her voice low and steady, a calm she did not feel. "We need to be very brave now. Can you do that for me?" Lily looked up, her blue eyes wide and tear-filled, but she nodded. She was her mother's daughter, a small ship built for stormy seas. The task was gruesome, a grim necessity that tested every fiber of Sarah's being. With an old tarpaulin from the workshop, they carefully and respectfully moved Arthur's body. It was a slow, arduous process, made harder by the weight of their grief. They brought him up the narrow stone steps and into the house, placing him in the back room, the one they had yet to clean. Sarah covered him gently, a silent promise passing between the living and the dead. The next day, Sarah made an anonymous call to the police from a payphone in the next town. She reported finding the remains of an elderly man in a patch of woods near the old Miller property, a story plausible enough to avoid immediate suspicion. She described a location far enough away from the house to divert attention. It was a lie that sat heavily on her conscience, but it was a necessary one. While the town buzzed with the news of the discovery, Sarah and Lily began their secret work. They buried Arthur in a quiet corner of the property, under the shade of an old oak tree, a spot that overlooked the rolling hills. They fashioned a simple wooden cross, and Lily picked a small bouquet of wildflowers to place on the freshly turned earth. There was no funeral, no eulogy, but in the quiet dignity of their private ceremony, they honored him more than any public display ever could. With Arthur laid to rest, Sarah's focus shifted to his final, cryptic message. "The plans are hidden. The key is in the stars. Look to the north. Follow the river of light." The stars. The north. A river of light. It sounded like a riddle from a children's storybook. Her first thought was the attic. It was the highest point of the house, the closest to the stars. The attic was a repository of forgotten things, a museum of a life lived in solitude. It was filled with old furniture draped in white sheets, boxes of books, and the faint scent of cedar and thyme. In one corner, under a dusty canvas, they found a large, brass telescope. It was a beautiful instrument, old but clearly well cared for. It was pointed at a small, circular window that faced north. "He must have watched the stars from here," Lily whispered, her voice filled with awe. For days, they searched the attic, sifting through Arthur's belongings. They found old photographs, journals filled with his elegant script, and books on astronomy, their pages filled with his handwritten notes. He wrote of constellations, of nebulae, of the vast, silent dance of the cosmos. He seemed to have a particular fascination with the Milky Way, which he referred to in his journals as the River of Light. The clue was coming into focus. Follow the River of Light. But what did it mean? One night, unable to sleep, Sarah went to the attic alone. The sky was clear, a blanket of glittering diamonds. She looked through the telescope, aiming it at the dense, shimmering band of the Milky Way. As she adjusted the focus, she noticed something odd. Etched into the main lens of the telescope, Almost invisible to the naked eye was a series of fine lines, like a map. And on that map, a single star was circled. Below it, a name, Polaris, the North Star. Her heart pounded. This was it. Another piece of the puzzle. But what did it mean? How could a star be a key? She spent the next few days poring over Arthur's astronomy books, learning everything she could about Polaris. She discovered that it wasn't just a single star, but a triple star system. And in his notes, Arthur had written something that made her stop and read it again and again. 3 stars, 1 light. 3 points, 1 location. The constant in a universe of change. 3 points, 1 location. It had to be a map. A map of the property. Armed with a compass and a tape measure, Sarah and Lily began to survey the land. It was a huge undertaking. The property was larger than she had realized, a sprawling piece of land with woods, a small creek, and rolling fields. They used the old oak tree where Arthur was buried as one point of reference. The second was a large, flat rock near the creek that Arthur had marked with a chiseled A in his journals. But they couldn't find the third point. Doubt began to creep in. Was she chasing a ghost? Was this all just the rambling of a lonely old man? The town's mockery echoed in her ears. Mrs. Gable's sneering face flashed in her mind. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was just a maid who had gotten lucky, a fool living in a fool's house. Just as she was about to give up, Lily, who had been exploring the edge of the woods, called out to her. "Mom, come see. There's a little house up here." It wasn't a house. It was an old, stone well, its opening covered with a heavy, wooden lid. And carved into the stone, so faint it was almost invisible, was a star. The North Star. This was the third point. They rushed back to the house, their hearts racing with renewed hope. Sarah drew a map of the property, marking the 3 points: the oak tree, the rock, and the well. She drew a line between each of them, forming a large triangle. And in the exact center of that triangle, where the lines intersected, was a single spot. A spot in the middle of an open field, a field that looked no different from any other patch of overgrown grass. They dug. For hours, they dug, their hands blistering, their backs aching. The sun beat down on them, and the earth was hard and unforgiving. Just as despair was beginning to set in again, the shovel hit something hard, a metallic thud that echoed in the quiet afternoon. They cleared away the dirt, their hands trembling with anticipation. It was a metal box, about the size of a shoebox, and it was locked. But this time, there was no keyhole, no strange disc, just a smooth, metal surface. Sarah looked at the box, her brow furrowed in concentration. How did it open? She thought back to Arthur's notes, to his fascination with the stars. 3 stars, 1 light. She remembered something else from his journals, a passage about Polaris being used for navigation, about how its position in the sky was constant. And she remembered the small, circular window in the attic, the one the telescope was pointed at. Leaving Lily to guard their discovery, Sarah ran back to the house, up to the attic. She looked at the window. It wasn't just a window. It was a skylight, designed to let in the light from a single point in the sky. She realized what she had to do. That night, under the silvery glow of the moon, they brought the box to the attic. Sarah positioned it directly under the skylight, in the path of the starlight from Polaris. And then, she remembered the key, the strange, metal disc that had opened the workshop. She had kept it, a memento of their discovery. On a hunch, she placed the disc on top of the box. For a moment, nothing happened. And then, as the faint, ancient light of the North Star filtered through the skylight and hit the disc, something incredible happened. The symbols on the disc began to glow, a soft, blue light. A low humming sound filled the attic, and with a soft click, the box opened. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, were not blueprints, not diagrams, but a series of thin, crystal plates. They were cool to the touch, and when Sarah held one up to the starlight, it seemed to come alive. Intricate patterns, like microscopic circuits, glowed within the crystal. And there was another letter. "Sarah, if you have found this, then you have proven yourself worthy. You have a mind as sharp as any engineer, and a heart as brave as any soldier. These are not plans. Plans can be copied, stolen. This is the heart of the engine, the energy source, a way to harness the quantum energy of water itself. It is a gift, but also a burden. You now hold the power to change the world. Use it wisely. Do not let it fall into the hands of those who would use it for greed and destruction. Trust no one. Arthur. Sarah looked at the glowing crystal in her hand, and for the first time, she understood the true weight of her inheritance. This was not just an invention. It was a revolution, and it was now in her hands. But Arthur's warning, trust no one, sent a shiver down her spine. The world was not ready for this. And there were people, powerful people, who would do anything to keep it a secret. Her quiet life as a maid was over. Her struggle was no longer just about survival. It was about protecting a legacy, a dream of a better world. And as she looked at Lily, whose eyes were wide with wonder, she knew that this was a fight she had to win. For her daughter, for Arthur, and for a future she was now responsible for creating. The next few months were a strange paradox. On the surface, their lives became a routine of quiet domesticity. They continued to work on the house, making it a home, room by room. They planted a garden, and the long-forgotten flower beds burst into a riot of color. To the outside world, they were just a single mother and her daughter, slowly fixing up an old, broken-down house. But beneath the surface, their lives were a whirlwind of secret activity. Every night, after Lily was asleep, Sarah would go down to the workshop. She would study Arthur's journals, his notes, his diagrams. She had no formal training in engineering or physics, but she had a sharp, curious mind, and Arthur's notes were so clear, so precise, that it was like he was there, guiding her, teaching her. She learned about quantum mechanics, about zero-point energy, about the incredible, untapped power hidden within a single drop of water. It was a new language, a new world, and she devoured it with a hunger she hadn't felt in years. She began to experiment, making small adjustments to the engine, following Arthur's final, unfinished notes. She was careful, methodical, her hands, once calloused from scrubbing floors, now deft and sure as she handled delicate wires and calibrated sensitive instruments. Lily, too, had a role to play. She became the keeper of the secrets, the guardian of their hidden world. She would stand watch while Sarah worked, her sharp eyes and ears a better security system than any alarm. She learned to read the sky, to identify the constellations, to understand the celestial map that had led them to their treasure. She was no longer just a little girl. She was a co-conspirator, a partner in the greatest secret the world had ever known. But secrets, like water, have a way of seeping out. The town was still watching them. Their quiet, reclusive life was a source of endless gossip. How could a maid, a woman with no money, afford to fix up a house, to buy supplies, to live without a job? Mrs. Gable, her former employer, was particularly suspicious. She would drive by the house slowly, her eyes narrowed, her face a mask of jealous curiosity. She had always looked down on Sarah, had always seen her as someone insignificant, someone beneath her. The thought that Sarah might have something she didn't, a secret, a treasure, was more than she could bear. One afternoon, a man in a black suit showed up at their door. He was tall and thin, with cold, gray eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. He said he was from the county assessor's office, that he was there to reevaluate the property value for tax purposes. Sarah's blood ran cold. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that he was lying. His questions were too specific, too pointed. He asked about the history of the property, about Arthur Miller, about any unusual discoveries they might have made. Sarah played the part of the simple, unassuming woman she had once been. She offered him a glass of lemonade, answered his questions with a shrug and a smile, and pretended to know nothing about anything. But inside, her mind was racing. They were coming for me. Arthur's words. The man in the suit was one of them. She knew they couldn't stay here forever. The workshop, the engine, it was all too exposed. They needed to move it, to hide it somewhere safe, somewhere no one would ever think to look. But where? And how? The answer, once again, came from Arthur's journals. In one of his last entries, he wrote about a contingency plan, a place of last resort. He called it the heart of the mountain. He described a series of natural caves in the mountains north of the town, a place he had discovered as a boy, a place that was hidden, inaccessible, and safe. He had even started to prepare it, to move some of his equipment, to create a second, even more secret workshop. It was a daunting task. The mountains were rugged, the caves remote. But it was their only option. They began to prepare. They packed the crystal plates, the heart of the engine, into a specially designed, lead-lined box. They dismantled the most critical components of the engine, the parts that were unique, irreplaceable. They worked at night, under the cover of darkness, moving the equipment in small, painstaking trips, using an old, beat-up pickup truck Sarah had bought with the last of her savings. It was a race against time. The man in the suit had been the first warning. Sarah knew there would be others. They were being watched. She could feel it, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, a sense of unseen eyes following her every move. One night, as she was loading the last of the equipment into the truck, a car pulled up at the end of the driveway, its headlights cutting through the darkness. It was Mrs. Gable. She got out of the car, her face a mixture of triumph and greed. "I knew it," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "I knew you were hiding something. What is it? What did you find in this old house? Gold? Jewels? Whatever it is, you don't deserve it. People like you don't deserve anything." She started to walk towards the truck, her eyes gleaming with avarice. But just as she reached the edge of the property, a low rumbling sound filled the air. The ground began to shake, and the old, stone well, the one that had been the third point on Arthur's map, began to glow with a strange, blue light. Mrs. Gable screamed, a sound of pure terror, as a geyser of water erupted from the well, shooting high into the air, a shimmering fountain of pure energy. It wasn't just water. It was alive, glowing, humming with a power that was ancient and terrifying. Sarah had done it. Following Arthur's notes, she had created a failsafe, a way to protect the workshop, to erase all traces of their secret. She had connected the engine's power source to the underground spring that fed the well, creating a powerful, localized earthquake, a surge of energy that would collapse the workshop, burying it under tons of rock and earth. Mrs. Gable scrambled back to her car and sped away, her tires squealing in the night. She had seen something she couldn't explain, something that defied logic, something that would haunt her nightmares for the rest of her life. She would tell her story, of course, but who would believe her? They would call her crazy, just as they had called Arthur Miller crazy. The irony was not lost on Sarah. She and Lily watched as the last of the glowing water subsided, as the ground fell silent. The workshop was gone. Arthur's secret was safe. They got into the truck and drove away, not looking back. The house, their home, was now just a shell, a monument to a secret it no longer held. They were heading north, to the mountains, to the heart of a new life, a new purpose. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger. They were fugitives, guardians of a secret that could change the world or destroy it. But as Sarah looked at her daughter, asleep in the passenger seat, a sense of calm washed over her. They had faced the ghosts of the past, had stared into the eyes of greed and fear, and they had won. They were not just a maid and her daughter anymore. They were pioneers, protectors, the keepers of a legacy of light. And their journey was just beginning. The journey to the heart of the mountain was a grueling test of endurance and will. For 3 days, they drove north, staying on back roads, sleeping in the truck, and living on stale sandwiches and lukewarm water. Sarah's meager savings were dwindling fast, and the uncertainty of their future was a constant, gnawing presence. Yet, with every mile that separated them from their old life, a sense of liberation grew. They were no longer victims of circumstance. They were architects of their own destiny, fugitives on a quest for a better world. The mountains rose from the plains like ancient, sleeping giants, their peaks shrouded in mist. Following the faded, hand-drawn map from Arthur's journal, Sarah navigated the treacherous, unpaved roads, the old pickup truck groaning in protest. Finally, they reached a place where the road ended, a place that seemed untouched by time, a wilderness of towering pines and granite cliffs. According to the map, the entrance to the caves was hidden behind a waterfall, a shimmering curtain of water cascading down a sheer rock face. It seemed impassable, a dead end. But Arthur's notes were precise. Walk through the water, and you will find the door. With Lily clinging to her back, Sarah took a deep breath and plunged through the icy cascade. For a terrifying moment, the roar of the water was deafening, the force of it threatening to sweep them away. But then, they were through, standing in a wide, dry cavern, the entrance completely concealed by the waterfall. The cave system was a natural wonder, a network of vast chambers and narrow passageways, sculpted by centuries of flowing water. In the main chamber, the largest of them all, they found the beginnings of Arthur's second workshop. There were crates of equipment, a small generator, and a stack of carefully preserved scientific journals. He had been preparing this place, this sanctuary, for years. Setting up their new life was a monumental task. They had to be completely self-sufficient, hidden from a world that was looking for them. They hauled the rest of the equipment from the truck, piece by piece, a slow, back-breaking process. They set up a small living area in one of the smaller, warmer caves, with cots, a makeshift kitchen, and a small library of Arthur's books. Sarah became a master of improvisation. She learned to harness the power of the underground river that flowed through the caves, using a small turbine Arthur had designed to generate electricity. She taught Lily how to forage for edible plants, how to identify animal tracks, how to live in harmony with the wilderness that was now their home and their protector. The workshop became Sarah's sanctuary. Here, surrounded by the silent, ancient rock, she could finally focus on her work, free from the prying eyes of the world. She reassembled the engine, its beautiful, complex components gleaming in the soft light of the cavern. With the crystal plates, the heart of the engine, installed, she was ready to begin the final phase of Arthur's work, to stabilize the energy source and make the engine a viable, sustainable source of power. It was a daunting challenge. The science was complex, the calculations precise. There were moments of frustration, of doubt, when she felt like an imposter, a simple maid playing in a world of giants. But then she would look at Arthur's notes, at his elegant, confident script, and she would feel his presence, his belief in her. And she would look at Lily, her bright, curious daughter, who never once doubted her, and she would find the strength to continue. Lily, in turn, blossomed in their new environment. The wilderness was her playground, the caves her castle. She shed the quiet, timid shell of her old life and became a confident, resourceful young girl. She learned to read the stars not from a book, but from the vast, open sky above their mountain home. She became an expert on the local flora and fauna, her small notebook filled with detailed drawings and observations. She was no longer just a maid's daughter. She was a child of the mountains, wild and free. But their idyllic isolation was not to last. One day, as Sarah was working on the engine, a strange, rhythmic thumping sound echoed through the caves. It was a sound that did not belong in the wilderness, a sound of machinery, of intrusion. Helicopters. They were flying in a grid pattern, methodically scanning the mountains. They were searching for them. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Sarah. They had been so careful. How could they have been found? She quickly shut down the engine, extinguishing the soft, blue glow that was its signature. She and Lily retreated to the deepest, most hidden part of the cave system, their hearts pounding in the sudden, heavy silence. They could hear the helicopters hovering overhead, the sound a menacing drumbeat that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mountain. For 2 days, they hid in the darkness, their food and water supplies dwindling. The helicopters were relentless, their presence a constant, terrifying reminder that they were not safe, that the world they had tried to escape was closing in on them. On the 3rd day, the sound of the helicopters receded and a fragile, uncertain silence returned. But Sarah knew this was not the end. It was a warning. They had been found, and it was only a matter of time before their pursuers came for them on foot. They had to be ready. Drawing on her great uncle's military knowledge, gleaned from his journals, Sarah began to fortify their home. They set up a series of early warning systems, using tripwires and simple, handmade alarms. They mapped out escape routes, secret passages within the cave system that only they knew. They were no longer just scientists. They were soldiers in a silent war, defending their home, their legacy, their dream. A week later, they came. A team of men in black, tactical gear, moving through the forest with a cold, professional efficiency. Sarah and Lily watched them from a hidden lookout point, their hearts in their throats. They were heavily armed, and they were using sophisticated tracking equipment. They were not just looking for a lost old man's invention. They were hunting. The men found the waterfall, just as Sarah had known they would. They were methodical, professional, but they were not prepared for what awaited them. They had expected to find a frightened woman and a child. They had not expected to find a fortress. Sarah, using her knowledge of the caves and Arthur's ingenious, non-lethal traps, began to fight back. A sudden rock slide, triggered by a carefully placed lever, blocked the main entrance to the cave. A disorienting blast of sound, created by a series of strategically placed echo chambers, confused and separated the team. A thick, non-toxic smoke, created from a mixture of local plants, filled the passageways, obscuring their vision. She was not a killer. She would not stoop to their level. But she would defend her home. She would defend her daughter. She would defend Arthur's dream. She and Lily moved through the caves like ghosts, always one step ahead of their pursuers. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they had one advantage the men in black did not. They were fighting for something they believed in. The final confrontation took place in the main chamber, in the shadow of the magnificent, silent engine. The leader of the team, a man with a scarred face and cold, dead eyes, finally cornered them. "It's over," he said, his voice a low growl. "Give us the engine, and we'll let you live." Sarah stood her ground, her body shielding Lily, her face a mask of defiance. "This engine is not for you," she said, her voice clear and strong. "It's not for your greed, your wars, your destruction. It belongs to the world." The man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "The world doesn't know what to do with power like this. We do. We'll control it. We'll own the future." He raised his weapon, his finger tightening on the trigger. But in that moment, Lily, who had been standing silently behind her mother, did something extraordinary. She began to sing. It was a simple, clear, beautiful melody, a song of the mountains, of the stars, of the river of light. Her voice, pure and unwavering, echoed through the cavern, a sound of such profound, unexpected beauty that it seemed to stun the men into silence. And as she sang, the engine, which had been dormant, began to glow. A soft, warm light emanated from the crystal plates, a light that grew in intensity, pulsing in time with Lily's song. The air in the cavern grew thick with energy, a palpable, humming power that was not threatening, but protective, alive. The men in black, their faces a mixture of fear and awe, stumbled back. They were soldiers, killers, men of violence. They did not know how to fight a song. They did not know how to fight a light. Then, Sarah, seizing the opportunity, activated the engine's final, most powerful defense mechanism. A wave of pure, concentrated energy erupted from the engine, a wave that was not destructive, but disruptive. It disabled all of their electronic equipment, their weapons, their communications. It left them powerless, disarmed, standing in the face of a power they could not comprehend. Defeated, not by force, but by a power they could not understand, the men retreated, their mission a failure. They left the mountains, their confidence shattered, their cold, hard world shaken to its core. In the aftermath, as the soft glow of the engine faded and the silence returned, Sarah held her daughter close, her heart overflowing with a love and a pride so fierce it almost hurt. They had done it. They had faced the darkness, and they had won. But Sarah knew that this was just one battle. The world was still out there. The men in black would be back. They would never stop looking for the engine. She also knew that they could not hide forever. The engine was not meant to be a secret, a treasure for them to hoard in their mountain fortress. It was meant to be a gift to the world, a gift that could heal the planet, end wars, and lift humanity out of the darkness of its own greed. She had a choice to make, a choice that Arthur, in his final, lonely moments, had left to her. She could keep the engine hidden, protecting it from a world that was not ready for it. Or she could take a leap of faith. She could trust in the power of hope, in the goodness of people, in the possibility of a better future. She looked at Lily, at her bright, brave, beautiful daughter, who had faced down men with guns with nothing but a song. And she knew what she had to do. It was time to stop hiding. It was time to stop running. It was time to change the world. A few weeks later, a small, independent journalist, a woman known for her integrity and her fearless pursuit of the truth, received an anonymous email. The email contained a set of coordinates, a simple message. The future is here. Come alone. Intrigued, the journalist followed the coordinates, a journey that led her deep into the mountains, to a hidden waterfall, to a cave filled with wonders beyond her wildest dreams. There, she met a woman and a young girl, who told her a story that would change the world forever. The story of a maid and her daughter, who had inherited an abandoned home and found a legacy of light. The story of a brilliant, forgotten inventor who had dreamed of a better world. The story of an engine that could run on water, an invention that would finally be shared with a world that so desperately needed it. Sarah and Lily's journey was far from over. There would be new challenges, new dangers, new battles to fight. The world would not change overnight. There would be resistance, disbelief, and greed. But now, they were not alone. They had the truth on their side. They had the hope of a better future. And they had each other. As they stood at the entrance to their cave, looking out at the vast, beautiful world that they were about to change, Sarah took Lily's hand. "Are you ready?" she asked. Lily looked up at her mother, her eyes shining with a light that rivaled the stars. "I'm ready," she said. And together, they stepped out of the shadows and into the dawn of a new day. The world did not change overnight. It shuddered. The journalist's story, backed by irrefutable proof, videos of the engine, schematics from Arthur's journals, and live demonstrations streamed from an undisclosed location, was the single most explosive piece of news in human history. It broke not like a wave, but like a global earthquake, sending shockwaves through every stock market, every government, and every household on the planet. The initial reaction was a tidal wave of disbelief. It was dismissed as an elaborate hoax, a conspiracy theory of the highest order. But the proof was relentless. Sarah, guided by the journalist, began releasing more information, carefully curated to be understood by the public, not just scientists. She demonstrated the engine's power by running a small, off-grid hospital in a remote African village, its lights blazing in a sea of darkness. The world watched, mesmerized. The powers that Arthur had feared reacted with predictable fury. Oil and energy stocks plummeted, creating a panic that threatened to collapse the global economy. Disinformation campaigns, slick and well-funded, flooded the internet, painting Sarah as a terrorist, a fraud, a mentally unstable woman who had stolen a dead man's fantasies. Mrs. Gable, tracked down by reporters, gave a rambling, hysterical interview about blue lights and geysers, a performance that only served to make her a national laughingstock and, paradoxically, lend a strange, new credibility to Sarah's story. The men in black vanished back into the shadows, their strategy shifting from overt force to covert manipulation. But they were too late. The idea, the beautiful, impossible truth of it, had been set free. It could not be unlearned. Sarah and Lily no longer lived in the heart of the mountain. Their cave had become a protected, historical site, a monument to the quiet revolution that had started there. They now lived in a secure, modest home in Geneva, under the protection of a newly formed international consortium, the Arthur Miller Foundation, funded by a coalition of forward-thinking nations and philanthropists. Their lives were a whirlwind of meetings with scientists, engineers, and world leaders. Sarah, the woman who had spent her life being invisible, was now one of the most famous and influential people on the planet. She navigated this new world with the same quiet dignity and unshakable resolve she had used to scrub floors and pull weeds. She wore simple clothes, spoke in plain, clear language, and never once let the powerful men in their tailored suits forget that this technology was not a commodity to be bought and sold. It was a legacy. It was a promise. Her primary condition for sharing the technology was that it could never be patented. It was to be open source, a gift to humanity, just as Arthur had intended. The Foundation's first project was to create small, easy-to-build household units, allowing individual families to go off-grid, to free themselves from the shackles of energy poverty. The first units were being deployed in developing nations, in disaster zones, in places the old world had forgotten. Lily, now 11, was handling the change with a wisdom that belied her years. She was a global celebrity, the child of light, as the media had dubbed her, but she remained grounded, her mother's anchor in the storm of their new reality. She was receiving a world-class education from private tutors, but she missed the mountains, the quiet wisdom of the forest, the feeling of the earth beneath her bare feet. One cool evening, 6 months after they had stepped out of the shadows, Sarah found Lily on the balcony of their apartment, looking out at the glittering lights of the city. The telescope from Arthur's attic, their first key to the mystery, stood beside her. "What are you looking at?" Sarah asked, wrapping a blanket around her daughter's shoulders. "Polaris," Lily said, her voice soft. "It looks different here. Brighter, maybe. Or maybe I'm just seeing it differently now." We're both seeing everything differently now, Sarah said, her gaze drifting over the city, a city whose lights would soon be powered by a dream born in a dusty, forgotten house. The fight was far from over. There were political battles to be won, corporate dragons to be slain, and the long, slow work of healing a wounded planet to be done. The men in the shadows were still there, waiting, plotting. But as she stood there, with her daughter by her side, Sarah felt not fear, but a profound sense of peace. They had done more than just survive. They had brought a new light into the world. He would be proud of you, Lily said, her head resting on her mother's shoulder. Great Uncle Arthur. He would be proud of us, Sarah corrected her gently. We did it together. She looked up at the North Star, the constant in a universe of change, the celestial guide that had led them on this impossible journey. It had guided them out of a life of poverty and despair, through a legacy of secrets and shadows, and into a future she could never have imagined. A future that was still being written, one drop of water, one ray of light at a time. The maid and her daughter had inherited more than a house. They had inherited the dawn. And now, they were sharing it with the world. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.